To understand the fury and disbelief that erupts when a narcissist's elaborate schemes fall apart, we must first accept a brutal truth. They never saw you as a person, but as a predictable machine. They believed they had the manual. They spent months, sometimes years, mapping your emotional responses. They cataloged what made you flinch, what made you lean in, what made you apologize for things you didn't do. In their mind, you weren't complex. You were a set of buttons they could push at will. They operated with a chilling confidence, assuming they could provoke, ignore, manipulate, or discard you, and you would follow the script they had written. But what happens when the machine suddenly changes its programming? The shock they feel isn't a sudden moral awakening, it's a structural collapse. The internal map they held so tightly, the one that promised you would chase or cry or crumble, has become obsolete. For a personality built entirely on the need to predict and control, encountering unpredictability isn't just confusing, it feels like a threat. Your silence isn't emptiness, it's the end of their emotional supply chain. Let's rewind. Narcissistic control rarely arrives with a loud bang. It's a slow, relational drip. If they pulled away and you pursued, that pattern got etched into stone. If they criticized you and you rushed to defend yourself, that reaction became part of the blueprint. Over time, they convince themselves they can engineer your emotions like a technician calibrating a device. But then, something shifts. You begin to heal. You learn to regulate your own nervous system. You set a boundary, or you simply choose the quiet dignity of non-reaction. When you disrupt the system, you stop being the reliable source of energy they depended on. This is where the rage originates. It's not just frustration over a failed plan, it's an ego injury of the highest order. They are forced to confront the terrifying reality that their power was never real, it was rented, and you just canceled the lease. There's a deeper psychological layer at play here. For a narcissist, control often masquerades as safety. In their developmental years, unpredictability might have been dangerous, so they learned to micromanage their environment to soothe their own anxiety. So when their strategies fail, they aren't just losing influence over you, they are losing the crutch they use to hold themselves upright. This loss triggers a cascade of panic, rage, and desperate attempts to reassert dominance. More guilt trips, more charm bombs, more threats, more smearing. They will try anything to restore the old order. But what truly unnerves them is this: you evolved past the version of you they had frozen in time. They underestimated your capacity for change because they believed your identity was static. They assumed your emotional responses were permanent fixtures, not habits you could unlearn with awareness. When you step outside their script, their entire prediction engine goes haywire. This is a philosophical truth they can't escape. Power that relies on another's weakness is a house of cards. The moment the other person finds their strength, the structure topples. They aren't shocked because the universe finally punished them. They are shocked because the fundamental variable in their equation, you, changed. You transformed. And when a manipulator's entire strategy rests on the assumption that you will never outgrow them, your evolution becomes their greatest miscalculation. The ultimate backfire isn't revenge, it's your simple, unshakable transformation. Let's go further. Most of their strategies aren't aimed at the person you are now, they're aimed at the ghost of who you used to be. When they plot, they're pulling from old data. They remember the version of you who tolerated the silent treatments, who over-explained their feelings, who begged for clarity, who tried to fix what they deliberately broke. Their entire psychological approach is anchored to your past reactions. But here is the critical flaw: they assume you are frozen. Narcissists often struggle to see others as growing, changing individuals. In their internal world, people become archetypes: the caretaker, the emotional one, the jealous one, the one who always comes back. Once you're labeled, you're mentally shelved in that category. Every future manipulation is calculated based on that dusty, outdated label. So when you actually change, whether through therapy, education on trauma bonds, or simply getting tired of the cycle, you're not just ruining a plan, you're shattering their cognitive framework. They don't see the shift coming. They pull the same lever they've pulled 100 times: withdrawal to trigger pursuit, provocation to trigger a reaction, triangulation to trigger insecurity, and the lever snaps. Confusion sets in, because in their mind, the old script should still be working. This is where the visible shock occurs. It's the moment they realize the person they thought they understood has become a stranger to them. They calibrated their manipulation to your old wounds. You outgrew the wound, so the weapon broke. Their manipulation was calibrated to your old insecurities, but you've stopped operating from that place. This is psychologically destabilizing for them. When you were trauma bonded, your nervous system was a live wire, seeking relief from the anxiety they created. They learned how to play that wire like an instrument. But when you learn to regulate yourself, when you no longer need them to provide emotional closure, the dynamic crumbles. They miscalculated because they projected their own resistance to change onto you. Since they avoid deep internal work, they assume you will stay the same, forever available for their games. Your growth exposes their stagnation, and that's humiliating. It reveals that their influence was always limited. It worked only as long as you stayed asleep. If we push deeper, we arrive at a weapon they despise: silence. Not the cold, punishing, silent treatment they use, but grounded, intentional, sovereign silence. The kind that comes from true detachment, not suppressed anger. For a narcissist, silence is radioactive. Their entire operation relies on emotional movement. They don't care if the emotion is love, hate, fear, or jealousy, as long as they can move you. Emotional movement equals influence. Even a negative reaction confirms they still occupy space in your psyche. But silence offers no data.
Their need for validation. It doesn't let them measure their impact. It doesn't confirm that you're hurt, jealous, or longing. It creates a void of ambiguity, and for someone who survives on control, ambiguity is torture. Neurologically, this is profound. Their patterns rely on predictable feedback loops: action-reaction, stimulus-response. When that loop breaks, their nervous system hits a state of uncertainty that feels like panic. This is why silence often makes them escalate. They'll try stronger provocations, more outrageous lies, bigger dramatic gestures. They aren't trying to reconcile, they're trying to jumpstart the broken feedback loop. They need proof they can still reach you. But grounded silence sends a powerful message without a single word. Your tactics are ineffective here. This shocks them because in their internal narrative, you were supposed to play your role. You were supposed to defend yourself. You were supposed to demand explanations. Silence disrupts the role they assigned you. It also starves the drama. Narcissistic dynamics thrive on intensity. The highs and lows create addiction. When you remove your participation, the intensity dissolves. Without your energy, the drama can't sustain itself. Philosophically, silence is sovereignty. It's the refusal to be drafted into someone else's psychological war. It's not avoidance, it's the discernment that engagement would only reinforce the system you're trying to exit. The paradox is that silence feels small, but its impact is enormous. When you don't react, they are left alone with their own behavior. The shock isn't just losing you, it's losing access to your nervous system. You are no longer a source of emotional regulation for them. Now, what happens when the plans fail? They often turn to projection. This is psychologically fascinating. Projection is the act of dumping their own disowned traits onto you. If they are deceptive, they call you a liar. If they are unstable, they call you crazy. If they are controlling, they suddenly accuse you of being controlling. This move serves two purposes. It protects their fragile self-image and it lures you into a fight. Because the moment you argue against a false accusation, you're back in the dynamic. You're explaining, proving, defending, emotionally invested in correcting the narrative. From their perspective, the system is restored. But when their plots backfire, projection starts to fail. It fails when you refuse to accept the role they're casting you in. Narcissistic dynamics depend on a cast of characters, the villain, the victim, the savior. These roles stabilize their world. If you're the unstable one, they get to be the rational one. If you're the bitter ex, they get to be the misunderstood survivor. But when you stop participating in the play, when you don't defend, don't counterattack, don't try to clear your name, the projection has nowhere to land. Psychologically, projection requires absorption. It needs you to internalize the label or fight against it. When you remain steady and detached, the accusation just hangs in the air, unsupported. Over time, people start to notice the inconsistency. The contrast becomes stark. Their intensity looks disproportionate. Their narrative starts to look forced. What shocks them isn't that you defended yourself well, it's that you didn't need to defend yourself at all. You trusted that truth doesn't require a performance. When you refuse the assigned role, you reject the entire psychological structure they built around you. You step off the stage, and without you, the script collapses. Let's talk about the smear campaign. When direct manipulation fails and projection doesn't land, they often try to control the narrative externally. They tell selective stories to mutual acquaintances, framing themselves as the victim and highlighting your worst moments, usually moments they provoked, while removing all context. The goal isn't truth, it's narrative dominance. If they can't control you, they'll try to control how others see you. A smear campaign is actually a confession. It's an admission that they feel powerless. They are seeking a new arena to feel strong in. But here's the subtle backfire. Smear campaigns depend on your urgency. They expect you to rush in, to correct every lie, to defend your character passionately. That reaction creates more noise, and in the noise, their narrative can survive. When you refuse to engage, something else happens. Your consistency speaks over time. People observe patterns, they see contradictions, they notice that you aren't behaving in alignment with the accusations. They also observe that emotionally regulated people don't need to destroy others to validate themselves. What shocks the narcissist is that you trusted time, you trusted your character, you trusted that integrity compounds quietly. The irony is that smear campaigns often accelerate the very exposure they aim to prevent. By overextending, exaggerating, and revealing their resentment, they erode their own credibility. Meanwhile, your restraint becomes strength. It doesn't mean it's painless. Being misrepresented hurts. But when you resist the urge to descend into chaos, you step outside the battlefield entirely. Manipulation thrives in reaction. It withers in dignity. There's another layer to the shock. They expected you to break. When they discarded you or tried to destabilize you, there was an unspoken assumption that you would spiral, that you would feel lost without them. In their narrative, your strength was a facade. So when you don't collapse, when you instead become calmer, more focused, more disciplined, you shatter their hierarchy. They regulated their self-worth by comparing themselves to you. If you were struggling, they felt superior.
But when you level up, it forces them to confront an uncomfortable possibility. Maybe they weren't the source of your stability. Maybe they were the source of your chaos. This reversal is hard to process. The greatest revenge is not pain inflicted, but a life lived so well they become irrelevant. Your elevation represents a loss of control. When they thrive after you, it threatens their belief that they are irreplaceable. So they might try to diminish your progress, saying you've changed as if growth is a betrayal. But this only highlights the core truth. You did not fight their plot directly, you simply refused to collapse under it. Now we have to talk about the concept of supply. When a narcissist loses you, what they are really losing is emotional fuel. Supply isn't love, it's attention, reaction, conflict, anything that confirms their significance. It's what regulates their nervous system and soothes their internal insecurity. When you praised them, chased them, or even argued with them, you are feeding the system. When you withdraw that energy, you're cutting off their oxygen. They might tell themselves they have other options, but what they're losing is a predictable source of regulation. Your nervous system was entangled with theirs, and that entanglement created stability for them, even if it created chaos for you. When that entanglement breaks, they feel it. It exposes a dependency, not yours, but theirs. They often project neediness onto you, but beneath the surface, they are dependent on external validation to maintain equilibrium. Without supply, they are left alone with themselves, which is exactly what their personality was designed to avoid. This is why you might see hoovering, sudden apologies, or provocations. These aren't attempts at reconciliation, they are attempts to restore regulation. They want to know, can I still access you?
When you remain emotionally unavailable to the old dynamic, the system destabilizes. The ego injury occurs because their power was conditional. It depended on your nervous system being hooked into theirs. When you unhook, the illusion dissolves. The backfire is the quiet removal of access. Finally, we need to move away from mystical language and talk about consequence. People call it karma when a narcissist's plots backfire, but what we're really seeing is the natural collapse of unsustainable architecture. Manipulation can look effective in the short term, but long-term stability requires trust, integrity, and coherence. Without those, every connection becomes fragile. Over time, patterns reveal themselves. You can't consistently distort reality without being seen as unreliable. You can't repeatedly betray trust without people withdrawing. The narcissist is shocked because they believed they were the exception to consequence. They mistook short-term wins for long-term power. But when their plots unravel, it's often because the relational bank account was already overdrawn. This is where the shock turns to anger. Consequences feel unfair when you're used to avoiding them. But in reality, this is simply alignment, behavior and outcome reconnecting. Narcissistic defenses create an illusion of invulnerability. When backfire occurs, it punctures that illusion. It forces a confrontation with limitation, which is deeply uncomfortable for someone whose identity is built on superiority. Manipulation can win battles, but integrity sustains life. When the structure collapses, it's not because the world conspired against them. It's because reality eventually outweighs illusion. And in the end, nothing backfires more powerfully than a strategy based on deception, because sooner or later, the truth demands balance. If this resonates with you, if you've seen these patterns in your own life, know that your growth is the ultimate disruptor. Like this video and subscribe to Winds of Thought for more insights on navigating these complex dynamics.